So for this part of the workshop, feel free to follow along using the project package that you can download from ArcGIS Online. That link was posted in the description for this workshop on the web page. I think that Paul is going to be able to put that link also in the chat window. And it will look like this when you open it.
So it's right at the top of the chat window, but I'll post that again so that for those people who have come in late kind of get access to it.
Okay. Plus the one I just showed you is wrong because it is actually the one for the online one, but it looks very similar, and it's the map that I'm going to be using to do this next part of the demo. So if you want to take a minute and download it, you can just go ahead, open it up in ArcGIS Pro, and you will be able to follow along with me. So that map opens up, the project opens up using the 2020 County Health Rankings data from ArcGIS Living Atlas. So we'll start by looking at diabetes prevalence. It's mapped here with graduated colors symbology. Recall that diabetes prevalence is the percentage of adults aged 20 and above with diagnosed diabetes. Because it's a percentage, it's already normalized. The classing method is quantile, and the number of classes is 3. So we can see the top and bottom third of the values in each distribution. The same classification method, oh, sorry, my bad, let's go back. So the next map we're going to look at is obesity, and we're going to use the same kind of symbology. Obesity is defined as the percentage of adults aged 20 and above with a body mass index of 30 or more. Again, it's a normalized variable. Because obesity is a known risk factor for diabetes, we're interested in seeing the relationship between these two variables. So in ArcGIS Pro 2.8, you can now search for tools. We'll do that using the search for the swipe tool. Then we'll use the swipe tool to just try to visually compare the two distributions. But perhaps a better way to look at these two variables is to map them using bivariate colors, so we can see both of them at the same time on the same map. This map uses a 3x3 grid with the quantile classing method. A 2x2 grid shows the top half and bottom half of the values in both distributions. And a 4x4 grid shows a lot more variation in the middle values. But we could also use a 3x3 grid and only show the extremes. That is the top and bottom third of the values in the distributions. To do that, we click the down arrow next to the color scheme and choose Format Color Scheme. Then in the color scheme editor, we select an intermediate color and change it to no color. And we do that for all the other intermediate colors so that only the colors that are for the extreme values remain. Then you could go ahead and just apply the color scheme, but you might want to save it to a style so you can use it again or share it with others or reload it and make some more edits and then save it once more with a different name. This resulting map shows you the extreme values in a 3x3 quantile classification, which would reveal the most extreme cases where both values are high, both values are low, or one value is high and the other value is low. The same could be done with a 4x4 classification, showing values that are even more extreme, the top and bottom 25% of the values in each distribution. So let's compare those two maps again. Here's the 3x3 classification, and here's the 4x4 classification. Now let's look at another way to show both variables at the same time on the same map, this time using dot density mapping. On this map, obesity is shown in pink and diabetes is shown in blue. For dot density mapping, we switch the variables to be the numerator of the normalized variables used in the previous maps. On this map, then, 1 dot equals 7,000 people. Notice that adult obesity is the first field shown in the symbology pane. This is the same map, except the order of variables is switched so that obesity is shown second. It's important to note that the order of variables will affect the display of the map. So let's compare these maps one more time. This map shows obesity on top, and this map shows diabetes on top. Notice the seed value for this map with diabetes on top. It's the same as the seed value for the map with obesity on top. You would use the same seed value if you want to match exact dot placement across two layers or two maps accessing the same data source. So if we create two layers, one for diabetes and one for obesity, and use the same seed values for both layers, we can display the diabetes layer over the obesity layer to see that the values for obesity are higher than for diabetes. That is, there are more dots because more people are obese than have diabetes. And we can also see where those dots overlap. For this map, we simply clicked the Regenerate Dot Placement button a couple of times to draw the maps for diabetes with a new random pattern. I'll flick back and forth between these two maps, so hopefully you can see the very subtle change. This is a regenerated random pattern, and this is the original random pattern. We'll change the seed value for diabetes back to 2815 so that the dots are overlapping again. And we'll click the Appearance tab, and we're going to look at the options for layer blending to see how we can blend the top layer with the one below it that has the obesity dots. We'll choose Multiply to multiply the values of the colors in the top layer with the values of the colors in the bottom layer. The result is a purple color wherever the blue and pink dots overlap. Because the seed value is the same, you won't see any more blue dots because all the blue dots overlay the pink dots when we use two layers with the same seed value. But if we change the seed value for the obesity layer, we'll see a few blue dots that are being drawn because they have a different random pattern. A little hard to see, but there they are. So let's go back to the bivariate dot density map with diabetes on top. Instead of creating two different layers, we can improve the appearance of this map using feature blending to multiply the color of dots on top, those that are for diabetes, with the color of the dots on the bottom for obesity. This works because the two sets of dots are drawn as two symbol layers of the same feature. So on this map, we've added a third diabetes risk factor, physical inactivity, defined as the number of adults age 20 and over reporting no leisure time physical activity. And again, we're using the feature blending for multiply, which means that those colors are being multiplied between the layers. So one of the things you'll want to think about for these kinds of multivariate dot density maps is the considerations we've pointed out, including managing for dot overlap and display. At times you want the dots to overlap, but other times you may not. So let's look at a different way to show these three variables, this time using charts. On this map, we're back to showing normalized data as the percentage of adults with diabetes, the percent who are obese, and the percent who are inactive. Each variable is shown as a bar in the chart. You have the option to prevent the dots from overlapping on the map. If you choose this option, leader lines will be used to connect the features on the map with their chart symbols. You could also look at the same three variables using pie charts instead of bar charts. Note that the size of the symbols on this map is fixed at 32 points. The size of the symbols could instead be related to the sum of all the values. Here we use that approach with the raw values rather than the normalized values. We also reduced the minimum symbol size to create more variation in the size of the symbols. Another alternative is to scale the size of the symbols by a field, as we did here by obesity or by diabetes. But since that field was used to set the symbol sizes, we removed it from the pie interiors and instead added another diabetes risk factor, adult smoking, defined as the percentage of adults who are current smokers. Note that we are again using the normalized values for this map. So we have percent adult obesity, percent physical inactivity, and percent adult smoking, and the circles are sized by diabetes prevalence. For this final example, we added one more risk factor, excessive drinking, defined as the percentage of adults reporting binge or heavy drinking. On this map, the size of the symbols is related to the prevalence of diabetes, and the 4 risk factors associated with the disease are used to segment the pies. But how about if we showed diabetes prevalence as a choropleth map? We'll again use quantiles, but this time we'll use 4 classes. Then we can use the pie charts to show the contributing risk factors, but we fixed the size at 32 points so that you can more easily compare the contribution of each risk factor across the states. We could even scale the symbols to the sum of those risk factors. So you can see that the combinations of mapping methods, such as choropleth maps and chart maps, can be used to show multiple variables as well. So all the mapping methods we're showing you, there might be ways to combine them for even additional ways to map multiple variables. So now let's look at a different approach, combining the colors and sizes of symbols to show 2 variables. This is our diabetes map with 3 quantile classes, and this map shows obesity as hollow graduated circles over the diabetes choropleth map. But how about if we just shift the color from the choropleth map into the graduated circles? That's done using the second tab on the symbology pane to vary symbology by attribute. So here we varied the color of the graduated symbols by the diabetes prevalence attribute. Then, in order to show more color variation on the map, we formatted the color scheme to have darker colors for the higher values. You could also switch up the map to show diabetes with the graduated circles and obesity with the color. But let's look at something else. For the last county level example of color and size, we used graduated squares to show diabetes, and then we made some modifications. So the way we did this was to change the circles to squares, and we did that by clicking on the template symbol on the primary symbology pane. We changed the form to a square, and then we got rid of the outline by setting the width to 0, but you could also set the outline color to no color. Then we clicked the option button on the symbology pane, and we chose vary symbology by attributes. Finally, we set the vary symbology by attributes field for color to adult obesity, and the result is a graduated squares map showing diabetes with graduated blue colors and graduated blue colors showing obesity. So obviously you could also use state level data, which for these maps might make more sense so that you can more clearly see the symbols and there's not so much overlap. So here we used size to map diabetes and then vary symbology by attribute with color to map obesity. You could, as with the other, as with the counties, you could reverse the symbology to show obesity with the size and diabetes with the color. So the choices you make will depend on your mapping purposes. While there are almost countless ways for varying symbology by attributes that we could show you, I think you probably get it at this point. So we're going to end this demo with an example of what you can do when you choose to allow symbol property connections. For this demo, we'll use the CMYK method that John talked about in his video. Here's the map he made using the color combinations of cyan, magenta, and yellow. Only we're now using 2020 data, so it's slightly different because it's more updated information. On this map, cyan is used to show smoking, magenta is used to show obesity, and yellow is used to show excessive drinking. And color combinations show where those variables overlap. To make this map, he clicked on the symbol used for the primary symbology, which was single symbol. Here it's shown as a pink fill symbol. On the symbology pane, he clicked the options button at the upper right and chose allow symbol property connections. The database symbol then appeared next to the color. So he clicked this. And on the Set Attribute Mapping window, you can choose a variable in the data set or you can choose to set an expression. John chose to use an expression. This expression scales the smoking variable to be mapped with the color cyan. The obesity variable is scaled to be shown with magenta, and the yellow is used to show the scaled values for excessive drinking. Black was set to 0, so the colors on the map were the colors defined by these new CMYK values. Once the edits are accepted and the symbology has been applied, the map updates. So counties with high smoking but low obesity and drinking values are shown in cyan. Counties where there's only high obesity are shown in magenta, and counties that have only excessive drinking are shown in yellow. And then other colors are combinations of these three primary colors. So this is what the map looks like for our data. I simply used John's expression. He shared it in a blog post that he wrote about how to make the CMYK map. And I simply edited it for my data by changing the high and low values for each of the variables. And then if I wanted to, I could also just change where C, M, Y, and K were assigned. And so here we're looking at what our data looks like with diabetes in cyan, obesity in magenta, and inactivity in yellow. But this is a reassignment of the colors so that obesity is in cyan, diabetes is in magenta, and inactivity is in yellow. And here it is for diabetes in cyan, inactivity in magenta, and obesity in yellow. We noticed that the distribution of values for diabetes was skewed. So there were more low values in that field than there were for obesity and inactivity. And we decided to transform the values so that the distributions were more similar and that the color definitions would have more realistic color values. So we use cyan for diabetes, magenta for obesity, and yellow for inactivity, and this is the resulting map. To do what we did, you use the new data engineering tools in ArcGIS Pro 2.8 to perform the transformation. You just right-click the layer in the Contents pane and choose Data Engineering. Then you have access to the tools. You can click and drag the variables that you want to explore into the display at the right, And here you can see that diabetes does have a skewed distribution. So you just right-click that field and you can access the Transform Field tool. Now, this tool will alter your data because it's going to add a new field and calculate new values. Up to this point, we've been using all data straight from ArcGIS Living Atlas. We haven't downloaded anything except our detailed lines for our states. But at this point, you would have to make a copy of this layer and then you could do this transformation. We went ahead and did that. And now you can see that the distribution is much more normal and similar to the other two variables. And again, this was the resulting map. So before we move on, let's just review what we've covered so far. We talked about bivariate choropleth maps and how to format the color schemes. Plus, we showed you the new option to search for tools in ArcGIS Pro 2.8. We looked at dot density maps and how to use blend modes for layers and features. We looked at chart maps and how to combine them with other layers such as choropleth map. We looked at a variety of ways to use color and size together, in part by using the option to vary symbology by attributes. And we used the allow symbol property connections to change the color features using an arcade expression. Finally, we just briefly introduced you to the new data engineering tools that were released in ArcGIS Pro 2.8. So at this point, before we move on to ArcGIS Online, let's see if there are any questions that you might have about multivariate mapping in ArcGIS Pro. Now, I think you could either type your questions into the chat window, or if we already had some questions, we can go back and look at those. Or there may be other ways for you guys to ask us questions, but I'm not quite sure about this interface. So we'll just take a minute and see what we've got coming in.
All right, so we've got
Yes.
one question here. Eileen, can you read that, or shall I read that out loud?
You go ahead and read it.
All right, this is from Carol. It says, I realize you are just using this as an example, but please note that there are two kinds of diabetes. Type 2 diabetes can be related to obesity, inactivity, etc. Type 1, and also known as juvenile diabetes or insulin dependent, is not related to these lifestyle factors. Type 2 diabetes is becoming more prevalent. So that's more of a comment than a question. Thank you, Carol, for pointing that out.
I will clarify that we are looking at type 2 diabetes in this set of examples. And thank you, Carol. I should have mentioned that to begin with.
Great. Do we have any other questions coming in? I know that you've covered a lot of territory here, Eileen, in the last hour, and a lot of great features that are available in ArcGIS Pro, and it takes a while to get your head around everything and put that into practice. Do you have any more questions coming in?
We will take questions again at the end of the session, so if you're have a slight delay in thinking of something, we'll come back and we can certainly answer questions again about Pro later before we close. If there's nothing else coming in, why don't I move on?
Great. Thanks, Aileen.
Okay. All right. So now we want to switch focus and talk about multivariate mapping in ArcGIS Online. And for this part of the workshop, we'll work with a web map in the new map viewer in ArcGIS Online. Let's take a couple of minutes to explore this new interface in case you haven't had much opportunity to work with it yet. Oops, let me go back. On the left, you have options for working with layers and the map itself. So these are options that have to do with the various components of the map. So you could add new layers, you can change the base map, you can look at the legend, you can decide to show it, or you can just hide it. You can save the map, and if you get a little blue dot, then it indicates that your map is not currently saved. You could open a new map, or you can also look at the map properties. And one of the options in there is to preserve the map scale. This is really great because that means that if you turn this option on, then whatever scale your map is at will and then you save the map, will be the map scale that is displayed when people open your map or you open your map in the future. And the map properties options also include time. Plus, you can hide the interface. So if you wanted to, you could reduce all the information on the sides of the map. This might be great if you wanted to take, for example, a screenshot or share something. And then you can just click the option down below to show the interface again. Then you can print. So you can change the map title. You can change to multiple page setups. There are multiple file formats. There are even some advanced options. And notice that you can print with the layout, or you can print the map only. So this is really wonderful. On the other side are options for working with contents of the map. So on the left side, you're working with the map, and on the right side, you're working with layers within the map. And if you have a layer selected, then for that selected layer, you can set which attributes you're working with, or you can add an expression. You can change the style or the symbology, and then you can modify that style by selecting style options. And then, of course, you can choose to accept what you've done or cancel what you've done. And then to give yourself some more real estate in the map viewer, you can click the X at the top of either of the panes on the right or left that open when you select something from the far right or left panes. And then finally, on the right-hand pane, again, properties of the layers in the map. You have the properties options. We'll see those in a minute. Styles, where you're working with the symbology. You can filter features. You can configure the pop-ups. You can configure the fields. You can work with the labels. And you have a set of tools that help you to search for features, measure things on the map, get directions, and find locations. So this is the new map viewer. And one of the things we'd like to find out from you is if you've used this new map viewer in ArcGIS Online. So if you would take a minute and type into the chat window, yes, you've used it, or no, you haven't had a chance to use it yet, that would be great. We'll find out how many people have had a chance to get going on this new map viewer, which is now the default. However, and while we're waiting for chat answers to come in, if you saved and shared a map that was created using the classic map viewer, which was the default map viewer up till a couple of weeks ago, then when somebody opens or you open that map again, it will be shown with the classic map viewer. You can always switch before you open the map. You can go to that ArcGIS Online item, and when you open the map, there's an option, if you click the drop-down button, to use the classic map viewer, or the it'll be called classic map viewer, and if it just says map viewer, it's the new map viewer. So you can always open up and look at maps in either one. If you want to do some work with the old map viewer, because there are still some things that you can't do with the new map viewer, then go ahead and open it with classic map viewer. So what's it look like?
Aileen, it looks like most people have not used the new map viewer. We've got one person that has, but we're getting a lot of no's. So I know the new map viewer became the default in what was it, the last month or so.
Yes.
So that might be the reason why a lot of people haven't used it yet.
Well, wonderful, because that means that we will be able to introduce you not only to multivariate mapping in ArcGIS, but we'll also give you a little introduction to the new map viewer. But let's talk a little bit more about multivariate mapping in ArcGIS Online. So if you take a look at the online help for creating a map, you'll find a description of how to make online maps that I think is really useful and somewhat unique. It starts with the basic steps for making an online map. And the discussion moves on to a review of the types of variables you may be mapping. This includes variables like the location of things, or quantitative variables for numeric attributes, qualitative variables for category or type attributes, and you might have date or time attributes in your data. So knowing what kind of attributes you have, you can think about combinations of these variables, like 2 or 3 numeric attributes, or 1 category type attribute and 1 numeric attribute, or 1 datetime attribute and 1 numeric attribute. And this leads to an understanding of the combinations of variables that might benefit from the use of multivariate maps. And if you know what types of variables you want to map, then the next thing to know is what kinds of maps you can make. In ArcGIS Online, there are a lot of choices. So let's just take a break for our last poll. We want to know how familiar you are with the style options in ArcGIS Online, with the scale of 1 being unfamiliar and 5 being very familiar. So I'll go back one slide. You can see these are the types of style options in ArcGIS Online. If you've used all of them or most of them, you might put a 5 in the chat window. If you've only used one or none of them, then reply with a 1. And if you're somewhere in the middle, let us know that too. In fact, while we're waiting for those answers to come in, a couple of these things are new, and a couple of them are not even available in ArcGIS Pro. For example, you can't do right now predominant mapping in ArcGIS Pro. And so there might be opportunities for you to use ArcGIS Online to make some maps that you wouldn't be able to make in ArcGIS Pro at this point. Okay.
So Eileen, looks like we're getting mostly 1s and 2s, a few 3s and 4s, no 5s.
Okay.
So
awesome. Great. Then this presentation is for you because that's sort of where I scaled it. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to do a live demo. So for this part of the workshop, we'll work with a web map that's in the new map viewer in ArcGIS Online. And the link to that web map is in the chat window. Paul, maybe you could pop it in there. And also on the web page that has a description of this workshop. So if you want to take a minute to open that web map, feel free. You will need an ArcGIS Online account to do that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to switch over and go to the Pro demonstration.
So just give me a second there and I'll
not the Pro, I mean the online. I meant online demonstration. So
yeah.
All right. All right, so I'm going to keep going. Like I said, this is a live demo, so we're going to see how it goes. First of all, I want to point out that this is the web map we want to work with. It's called Multivariate Mapping in ArcGIS Online, and it's for CCA 2021. And if I click this arrow on Open Map Viewer, this is my option to open it in the classic map viewer. But if I just click Open in Map Viewer, it's going to open in the new map viewer. And here we see that we are again working with the County Health Rankings 2020 data. We're displaying diabetes prevalence, and so it's the Core Plus map that we're used to seeing. So I'm going to close that pane, and I'm going to click this. Oh, I'm not signed in. So the first thing I want to do, because I want to access these tools on the right, is to sign into ArcGIS Online. And now what will happen is that the options on the right-hand pane will be enabled, and I can start to work with that map. Otherwise, I can just open it and look at it, and I can't do anything with it. And we'll just wait a second for this to come up. You can see it's loading. Here's some data shown down here. Interface starting to come up. It's not Pro, or it's not online, by the way. I just got some new internet in my house. All right, and we can see that there are 3 layers being displayed right now because as I zoom in or out, I may be accessing one of these other layers. So this, for example, is the states, and these are the counties. So the first thing I'm going to do is just turn off the display, the visibility for the others. And I'm going to click this 3 buttons next to the county health rankings, and I'm going to choose Show Properties. I'm going to scroll down here on the right, and I'm going to pull this slider over to the left so that I'm looking at these counties at any map scale. And now I can close this window by clicking the X at the right on the Properties window and the X on the Layers window, and I'm able to see my map. And whether I scroll in or out, I'll be able to see these counties. Okay, over here, I don't think it's in your map. I created, just for this demo, a little bookmark, so if I ever lose where I'm at, I can come back to where I want to show you. All right, so let's take a look at the style that's being used for this map. Right now, it is diabetes prevalence is the attribute, and counts and amounts with color is being used to show the data. So we're only using one variable here right now. So we're looking at multivariate maps. So let's go ahead and add another field. We'll add adult obesity, and here I can just start searching for it.
So Eileen, can you post that link to the map in the chat window there? Because I don't think I have access to it.
If you go to the web page for this workshop, it's linked right there. Can you do that?
Oh yes, so if you go to the details page, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me just search for obesity. And there it is, adult obesity. And I'm going to add that. And now my options, if I scroll down, are going to change here. What I can do if I have 2 variables selected is different from what I can do if I have only 1 variable selected. So let's use color and size, because we've seen that before in ArcGIS Pro. So here we can see that the color is being used to show diabetes prevalence, and the size is being used to show adult obesity. So if I click back on the Style Options button and I just rearrange those two by clicking the dot array at the left and sliding one up or down, then that will make a change to how these are displayed. So I'll again click Style Options, and then I can see now that adult obesity is in the color and diabetes prevalence is in the size. Now let's just take a look. You can see I can change options for either one of those. We'll look at the options for the colors first. And here, one of the things to note is that I can change this to show maybe above and below a distribution, or just below a distribution or above, but for our data, high to low works. And here is where I can normalize those data, but we don't need to because we know that adult obesity is a percentage. Here, I can edit the color scheme, so I just click that arrow. Instead of circles, I might want to show squares. I could rotate it, doesn't make any sense really for these guys. I can choose different color ramps. I'm going to choose this one. It's called Blue 7. Note that I could change the fill symbol as well. And let's take a quick look at the outline. The outline for these features is for the county itself, because these values are related to the counties. I'm just going to quickly answer the question in the chat window. I found the page, but styles is grayed out. Make sure just above that here that it doesn't say sign in and that you are signed in, and also make sure that the layer is selected in the layers window. So click layers over here, select county health rankings, and then if you're signed in, you should be able to click styles. See? Okay, hopefully that helps you. All right, close out again. And I'm going to go click at styles again, and we'll go back into the style options. And we're back in colors again. All right, so note that you can also, if I click this color ramp, change the transparency of the color ramp, and let's go back and look at the outline. This is the outline of the counties, so I could change the color that I'm using. I could just pick one from this little chip chart here. I could use a custom color, so maybe for these guys I want to pick something in the blue-green range, and I want it to be maybe a little darker, kind of to match our symbology. I could set the outline transparency. I could change the stroke or the line symbol itself by modifying its width, and I can also adjust the width automatically, which means that as I zoom in and out, it will, the width of the symbol will scale. But actually don't need to do much of that, so we'll just keep what we've got so far. And I also want to note that as I make changes in these windows, they're automatically changing on the map. So this WYSIWYG environment is really helpful when you're trying to make mapping decisions, because you can see what the changes are going to look like right away. So I'll choose my squares, and now I'm going to look at the symbol styles. Again, I've got options for those kinds of the things that I've already looked at, colors and transparency, and I can choose if I want it to show it in the legend or not. Now I'm just going to go back, and now let's work with the size of the symbols. So the size is related to the diabetes. Again, I can normalize the field. I can, again, choose the symbol here, so I don't actually have to go into the color options. I could just choose the size of the symbols and the whether I'm using squares or circles here. But let's scroll down. So I could make the size ranges a little different. Right now my high values are really pretty high. I'm going to drop those down, see what they look like as I reduce them. And I can also choose this option to adjust the size automatically or not. So if I scroll in and out, then the sizes of the symbols are not being adjusted. But if I use this option, then scrolling in and out will be determined by the map scale. I can show the background symbol. Doesn't really matter if I've changed it with the other one and changed it here. The one on the top is going to overdraw this one. So I also want to show you this. We're going to modify this so that our smaller values are 4 is fine. But this one I'm going to change to about 30. And I can just select the number and type it in. And then I can move this guy up so that more features are shown with the smaller symbol sizes. And here I'll just type in 6. They're still kind of overlapping in the map, so let me change this to about 20. Let it refresh. And that might be pretty close to what I think might be useful for this map. It's pretty close to what I want to do for this part of the demo, so I'm just going to click Done, and we're going to move on to a different mapping method. This time we're going to look at relationship mapping. Back on the style options, we are still working with 2 variables. So let's look at the options that we can choose. Compare A to B. Dot density we'll come back to, and predominant category we'll come back to. There's location, single symbol, types, and size. We don't have a type. We have 2 numeric variables. So let's look at relationship. Relationship is bivariate choropleth mapping, as you can see in the legend and the updated map. So let's look at those style options. The first thing you can do is change the color ramp. And here I'll turn it back to the same color ramp we used when we were looking at this map in ArcGIS Pro. I can change the grid size, I can change quantile mapping methods or classing methods. All of this is pretty similar to what you see in ArcGIS Pro. And for adult obesity, I can normalize it. And for diabetes prevalence, I can also normalize it. There's a difference here. You can't do this in Pro, but in ArcGIS Online, if I choose one of these variables and I want to make a change in the classification values, the break values, I can do that interactively. But I'm no longer mapping quantiles. I've changed those values. I'm now using manual breaks. So if I really want to keep the quantile mapping method, then I'm not going to be changing these handles. But sometimes, like as with our skewed distribution for diabetes, it might be useful to do that. So you can see this distribution over here is slightly skewed, and we might want to make some adjustments for that so that the values on the map are mitigated because of the skewness in this distribution. But I'm going to go back, because we're used to seeing it, to the quantile classification method, and then I'm going to scroll down to see what else we can do. Notice that I can change the focus on this map. I could maybe look at the low values instead. The map doesn't change, but the legend does. So if I look at the high values, the map again doesn't change, but the legend does. This is available in ArcGIS Pro. I just didn't take the time to show it to you because I knew I would demo it here. Also, I can change transparency by attribute. Now, recall that we're using basically two sequential color schemes and combining them to create this grid of colors for a bivariate choropleth map. So if you start changing the transparency by another attribute, then the lightness and darkness of these colors is going to be modified, and it will be difficult to identify which class the colors belong in. So let's take a look at this color ramp again. I'm going to click this edit button here, this little pencil, and I want to show you something new in ArcGIS Online and wonderful in ArcGIS Online. So if I click this down arrow next to all color ramps, notice that they've been pre-filtered for you. So if I'm using like light gray canvas, maybe I want to look at the color ramps that are best for a light background. But if I'm using dark gray canvas, then I want maybe the dark background color ramps. And we have the colorblind friendly color ramps. So if I scroll down through this set of color ramps for bivariate colors, bivariate choropleth maps, I will not find the purple, pink, blue color ramp because it's really not colorblind friendly. So let's pick something else instead. Let's choose this sunset smudge color ramp. Now, I don't know how many folks out there are like me, started back in the ArcInfo days when they actually named the colors, and you could use color names to symbolize features on your map. But I'm kind of happy to see these things again, where the colors are, the color names used to show the colors are a little bit more creative now instead of pink, blue, purple. So let's use sunset smudge. Only look what happened. It assigned the light colors to my high values. So I'm just going to use this option right here to rotate the ramp colors. Getting closer, they moved from this position down here up to this position, so I'll rotate one more time, and now I have my high values with my dark colors. Again, I can change fill transparency. Again, I caution you not to do that. And here again are all the same options to vary the symbology of the background feature, in this case, the counties that the colors are being assigned to. So this looks pretty good. let's accept this. So I'll close that window and we'll just close the style options for a moment. Go back to style options and close that. Take a look at the map. And that should look fairly similar to what we were working with in Pro, but now we know that this map is colorblind friendly. So let's take a look at another mapping method. And I'm going to switch up my little demo here. So I'm shuffling my papers. We're going to look right now at predominant category. And you'll see that there are two things, predominant category in size and predominant category. So we're just going to start with predominant category. And I'm going to switch this to be red and blue. And this one right here, because we're sort of used to seeing adult obesity in red and diabetes prevalence in blue. And so now we're just looking at predominance between those two. Well, right? Because what we're asking is, if we're looking at obesity and we're looking at diabetes, of those two things, which one is more predominant? Well, we already saw from our example in ArcGIS Pro, in particular the dot density mapping, that adult obesity is much more predominant within an area than diabetes prevalence. So let's do something different. Let's go back to the style options, and up here, let's add some fields. We know that there are a couple of other risk factors. We know that inactivity contributes to diabetes, potentially. We know that smoking actually is a risk factor for diabetes. So we'll add smoking. And there are others as well, but let's just see what happens when we work with a small set of these variables. So now we've got the 4 variables, and of these 4 variables, which one is of those 4 is the most predominant within an area? And you can see diabetes prevalence is nowhere near as high as the other values. And really, if we think about it, we might want to take diabetes prevalence out of here, because what we're trying to do is say, what are the risk factors for diabetes prevalence? So let's remove that one. We'll just click the X next to that. And now we're only looking at the risk factors. And we can see that for some counties, obesity is the bigger problem. And for other counties, inactivity is a bigger problem. And for a couple of counties, smoking is a bigger problem. And then we can look at the transparency, the lightness, darkness of those 3 fields, those 3 colors, to see, well, if it's light, yeah, it's predominant, but the other things also have a play in it. If it's really dark, then that variable is really sort of outplaying the other 2 variables. So understanding what we're working with here, let's take a look at some of the style options. Again, I can change the color ramp, or I can change the order of the variables. We're used to seeing adult obesity in pink, so we'll leave that. And we can change the transparency by predominance. We could just turn it off, for example. Now I just want to know what one is predominant. Just tell me the one that's predominant. I don't want to know how predominant it is. But we'll turn that back on. And you can change this range of values, as we saw for in John's demo, or you could change the sliders, but let's move on. I'm going to look now at predominant category and size. And we'll look at those style options. So here what we're doing is we're scaling the size of a graduated symbol that again shows the predominance, either obesity, inactivity, or smoking, and the amount of predominance by transparency. It's being scaled by size. Well, how is that working? Let's look at the style options. And we can, oh, let me go back and you'll see this. you can see that it's summing the categories. And since we're using normalized values, those values for each one fall somewhere between 1 and 100. So think carefully about using this. We can again change those symbols. Let's try squares. We could rotate them. This has to do with the outline of the symbol itself. So right now, we're going to turn off the outline. And we could change this range here. We can use the slider again, drop that down to 20. And we will slide this up so we have more smaller squares on the map. We could again just adjust the size automatically. We can change the background symbols, but let's take a look at our map right now. So we've looked at how to vary the symbology by just filling in the counties with the predominant category and changing the lightness darkness of that category to show how predominant the value is within that feature. And now we're looking at the sum of the factors, the contributing factors within that area, shown as the size of the symbol. Again, the predominance as the color of the symbol, the predominant factor as the color of the symbol, and the amount of predominance as the transparency of the symbol. So here we're looking sort of at 3 different ways to visualize those contributing factors. So the last thing I want to show you is dot density mapping, which we've seen in Pro. So what are the options for that? We have right now adult obesity, physical inactivity, and adult smoking, but these are all right now using the normalized values. So let's change those to use numerator of the variable. We'll change physical activity, inactivity to be the numerator. And we will see that I don't actually have, although I don't know why they could do it, a smoking numerator. It's all percentage. So I'm going to change that, and well, let's go back and look at diabetes. We'll search for diabetes. And we'll use diabetes prevalence numerator. Now, I understand, again, that we're looking at factors against the variable that we're trying to understand what is being contributed to, but this will be okay for this demo. So now we've got the numerators. I could add more fields, but let's look at the style options. Here I can change the symbology. Again, we're used to seeing these two. Oh, let's go back and let's move diabetes up 1. And now we'll look at this. And we can see that the adult obesity is in pink or white, which is what we're sort of used to seeing, or I mean red, which is what we're sort of used to seeing. And diabetes is in blue, and then we've got physical activity in green. Now, if I click on, and I could choose other color ramps, but I can also just click on the color chip and say, I want a custom color. I want that to be, for example, cyan, because that's what we used before. So now I can look at cyan. And I can also change the names of these things. So maybe I don't want to have numerator in there. And I could do the same for the other 2. I can also specify what one dot represents. In the legend, you can see right now that one dot represents 2,500 somethings, and we will specify that these are people. And I can show the background symbol. That's those county lines. These are the symbology options for that. And I can vary the dot value by scale. So notice that the dot value right now is 2,500. If I zoom in, it's going to change depending on the map scale. But if I keep it the same by clicking this option off, then when I zoom in, this will stay the same and my dots will spread out more at larger map scales. So you may want to just leave that checked. Okay, this is another important option, blending overlapping colors. Now to see this, I'm going to drop this way down. And right now we can see that the overlapping colors are being blended. So where pink and blue are together, it should be purple in here. But if I turn that off, then my dots are being displayed such that adult obesity, which is the one on top, is covering up everything else underneath it. This is very similar to the layer blending that we saw in ArcGIS Pro. So this is great, this blend overlapping colors option, and I'm told we will soon see it in ArcGIS Pro so that it mimics the same behavior as ArcGIS Online. Now, the other options for dot density mapping are pretty similar to what we've seen already in ArcGIS Pro, nothing really new. So what I'm going to do is stop this demo at this point because we have about 10 minutes left in this session, and I want to pass this back to Paul for a little bit of a wrap-up.
Sure. Eileen, we got a couple of questions from our first section, and to our audience, if you have questions for the online section, please type them into the chat window.
Okay.
You're going to say something, Eileen?
You want to wrap up first with the
sure.
final resources, and then we'll finish with questions?
Sure. So if you have questions, type them in while I do the wrap-up here. We do have some additional resources here. We've got some links, and I'm going to post them in the chat window so you can get to them right away. The first one, if you can skip to the next slide there, Aileen, is for learn.arcgis.com. This is a great site for a lot of different mapping and GIS lessons, and you can specify the lessons that you see depending on your interest and your capability. If you're a newcomer, there's a different set of lessons than you would have if you are a GIS professional. So do spend some time on this site. It's a really useful site with lots of great lessons. The next one is the link to the ArcGIS blog, and I'm going to put that in the link as well. And this is a constantly getting updated with a lot of really useful things about the software, new features in the software, different things that people have done. I know that Andy Skinner, for instance, has done a couple of maps on colorblind base maps. So that's really useful, a couple of posts that he's done that you might find interesting if you're looking for information on that. And then, of course, the last one is John Nelson's blog that he has done here. And if I can just find where my cursor is, I can put that in the chat window as well. As you can tell from the videos that we posted are shown that John Nelson's done, he really interesting speaker. And he does a lot of really interesting things. I think it's pretty much a cartographer's dream job that he has there, so we can all be a little envious of him. So do go to those different links there that we have posted in there. Do we have any more questions? Maybe we should first turn to a couple of questions that we've had from the Pro section. David asks, do you have any thoughts on normalized by population density maps for diabetes variables? Because dot density shows mostly population density.
Right.
I'm not sure if that makes sense to you, but.
Sure. Yes, and you probably noticed that the only map that I changed from using a normalized variable for was dot density. Dot density does relate to an area. You're filling an area, but what you're filling it with is the number of things in that area. And so in the data set that we're working with, when we look at a variable like diabetes prevalence, it's the number of people with that condition if we take the numerator. If we take the percentage or something like adult obesity where they forgot to put a percent on it, then we're looking at the normalized value, which is the percentage of people who have that who are adults, because it's adult obesity, people over 20. So to answer your question, for dot density mapping, we want to say that one dot equals something, but if we normalize the variable, then it's one dot equals a percentage of something. So for dot density mapping, it's more appropriate to use the count or amount. For graduated symbol mapping, you could do the same. But for choropleth mapping, you would definitely want to use the normalized variable. Then you just have to give some thought to whether it is you want to show the normalized variable or not for things like the pie charts or the bar charts. Depending on what you're mapping, you would maybe make different choices for those. So I hope I answered your question. Please let me know if I didn't in the chart window.
So another question that we have comes from Blair, and you touched on this with the ArcGIS Online viewer, which basically you can actually specify showing only colorblind color schemes, colorblind friendly color schemes, I should say. Is there a way in ArcGIS Pro to just have the same sort of thing where you can specify just show only the colorblind friendly color schemes?
No. Not at this time. If you keep an eye on ArcWatch, I just finished an ArcWatch tip on that. What you'll find is that there are some 300 color schemes available in over 300, almost 400 color schemes available in ArcGIS Online, and that 70 to 80% of them are colorblind friendly. Now, ArcGIS Pro has some intentions to sort of mimic some of the options that are in ArcGIS Online, and there have been some discussions about being able to identify things like the colorblind friendly ones. But you can also take a look back through my slides and you'll see which ones are colorblind friendly. Now, my definition of colorblind friendly is very, very stringent compared to the ones that were used for determining colorblindness for the color ramps in ArcGIS Pro. Take a look at the upcoming ArcWatch tip to see how that's done. It also provides some links to finding out a lot about those color ramps in ArcGIS Online. There is no reason, though, that we can't use the same color ramps in Pro that are being used in ArcGIS Online, but right now you can't filter them to find out which ones they are. I think you're going to see it soon.
Okay, great. Christopher has a question with the regards to the CMYK, where we specified different variables changing the values of the CMYK. Is there another way to change the CMYK without using the coding expression?
Not at this time, but it's super easy to use because all you have to do is copy that expression right from the blog post that John created, and you can just search for John Nelson CMYK, and I'm sure you'll find it. Copy it from there, paste it into the expression builder, and modify it any way you want. For the values that you're assigning it to, the C, the M, and the Y, you will want to change in the expression the high and low values in the variable that you're assigning to that channel, either C, M, or Y. So for my map, I just looked at the high and low values for diabetes prevalence, and then I changed those values in the expression. Super easy to use, but right now, and probably for the foreseeable future, you would just use the color combination expression and modify it.
Great. Any other questions out there? Now's your chance to ask them. Put them in the chat window, please. I made a comment. I mean, I'm still fairly new, like most people, to the new online map viewer, and it's a generational change from the classic one. There's so many more things that you can do in the new online map viewer than there was in the classic one. So definitely, if you haven't used it before, do spend some time with it. Just familiarize yourself with the capabilities. David,
I was
sorry,
just going to mention, there are lots of new blog posts coming out, learn lessons on how to use the map viewer, but honestly, it's super easy and it's just kind of fun to dive in and work with, if you want, just work with the map that I shared with you guys.
So just one more question from David before we wrap up. Or comment, I should say. Realize the dot density conventions, but I think that when showing thematic data, I think the maps using absolute values can be misleading.
Well, I understand what you're talking about, and you do have to be very, very careful. I have seen some beautiful dot density maps, though, even dating back into the middle of the past century, where you know, dot equals so many cows. The Agricultural Atlas of the United States uses dot density mapping to show a lot of their agricultural values, and they do it super well. So if you want to see you know, a nice examples of dot density mapping, those are great examples. But I agree that sometimes it's being misused. Now, I will say, true dot density mapping is a daisy-metric mapping method. The way that you really do dot density mapping, and it's not available in Pro, but it is in online, but it's certainly available in Pro, is to shuffle those dots out of the areas where they don't belong and put them into the areas where they do belong. So for example, if I were doing something like livestock, I wouldn't have any of the dots in areas that are protected, like, you know, maybe parks. I wouldn't have them in the middle of urban areas. I wouldn't have them in the middle of lakes. You can create, or you can use what are called exclusion layers. You can even use inclusion layers in Pro to shuffle those dots. So if you were doing true dot density mapping, then you would probably be using that daisy-metric mapping method. Mostly what you see for people, and including the examples I showed you, is a dot fill method, where we're filling the area with dots. And in that case, I totally agree with you. If the dots are being used as a fill symbol, then I really think that what you should be doing is using
Aileen, we have to wrap it up. I think we're going to get cut off very shortly. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Again, if you have any questions, send us an email. We'd be more than happy to answer. Thanks a lot for your great attendance, and hope you've learned something.
Thank you,
have a great day, everyone.